Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Philosophy, brought to you by the Atlas Society, the home of open objectivism. My name is Edward Hudgens. I'm the Director of Advocacy and a Senior Fellow at the Atlas Society. I'm going to be giving you your presentation tonight. Tonight's topic is Republicans, Libertarians, and what is really possible in politics. And a little bit of background information. I've worked at the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress in the belly of the beast. I've worked at the Heritage Foundation. I've worked at the Cato Institute. I have a PhD from Catholic University. I've taught at universities in this country and in Germany. So let's go ahead and move right to the topic for this evening, the Republicans, Libertarians, and what is really possible in politics. Well, Mitt Romney's defeat in 2012 presidential election, lost by Republicans of House and Senate seats, shocked the GOP leadership. They could not imagine how on earth Barack Obama and the Democrats, in the worst economy since the Depression, could actually win an election. Well, in a sense, the Republicans shouldn't have been surprised. This is the third loss by the Republicans of national elections in the last 4 elections since 2006. And the Republicans really still are in intellectual disarray. The Republicans, various factions, are fighting a battle for the soul of the Republican Party, and what will happen in the next year or two probably will determine the future not only of the party, but of possibly the freedom movement. So what I'm going to do tonight is, there we go, 7 things. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the context of politics, just to set up the context here. I'm going to talk about the polarized politics and how polarized we are now. I'm going to talk about the Republicans and polls. Polls in 2 senses. Polls in the sense of opinion polls, and polls in the sense of where you go in and you push the little button to vote for your candidate. I'm going to talk about the GOP when it stood for freedom. I'm going to talk about the GOP's move to statism and what's happened in reaction to that. I'm going to ask them as a libertarian alternative, and then I'm going to talk about what is to be done. So that's what you're going to see tonight in this presentation. So let's go straight to the context of politics. I want to remind everybody of a couple of things. First of all, politics is not a philosophy debate. A lot of people, especially intellectuals, sort of tend to think of it that way, but politics really is about winning elections, about changing public policy, and about changing the public's mind. It's important to know who your audience is and the fact that ultimately you have to appeal, win over voters and citizens. But further, that context of politics involves the economic situation, the social situation, cultural situation at any given time. Sometimes a message will fall flat. For example, Barry Goldwater's message in 1964 at the height of the welfare state enthusiasm, but then that same message will work at some other point, for example, in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. So we have to look at the context of today when we're looking at the freedom movement and the Republicans. And finally, we have to think in both short-term and long-term in terms of goals and strategies. You're going to have, in politics, you're going to have short-term compromises, things you might not like, but you got to keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak. So you're going to see me sort of going back and forth between the long-term and the short-term. So that was the context of politics. Let's turn straight to the political situation today. And it has probably never been as polarized, certainly in terms of the opinion polls. For example, last year, Barack Obama's approval rating among Democrats was 86%. For Republicans, it was 10%. This is kind of a reverse, almost an exact reverse of what it was in 2004 for George W. Bush, where Democrats disapproved of his performance by 85%, or disapproved by 85%. Republicans approved by about that much. So we're very polarized in terms of politics. Take a look at a couple of key questions to see how polarized the situation is right now. To the question, I believe it's a Pew poll: should government care for people who can't? Today, Democrats 75% say yes. Only 40% Republicans say yes. Compare that to 1987. when the Democrats were a little bit higher, but the Republicans were much higher. 62% of Republicans thought that government should take care of people who couldn't take care of themselves. What about environmental laws? Again, extremely polarized in terms along party lines here. Today, 93% of Democrats answer we should have tougher environmental laws. Only 47% of Republicans say that, compared to 1987. Again, 86% of Republicans were for tougher environmental laws, and Democrats are pretty much unchanged. Now, I maintain that this polarization reflects several things. First of all, it reflects the contradictions of the welfare state coming home to roost, so to speak. The welfare state is dependent on transferring wealth from one group to another. The more wealth is transferred from one group to the other, the more of the producers are penalized, the less production you're going to have and the more contention you're going to have. And that's what's happening today. That's what's happened over the last 2 or 3 decades with the welfare state. We see it more in Western Europe, of course, but we see it here as well. The second thing I call your attention to is probably back in the 1960s, even the 70s, people who call themselves liberals probably believed in the fundamentals of a free market and private property. They just believed that there should be some kind of a safety net for the poorest of the poor. They believed that the market had market failures. I think they were wrong, but they thought that. And that the government might have to step in from time to time to tweak the market. But I think liberals back at that time actually believed generally in the fundamentals of this country. Today, that is not the case. Liberals today really are more socialists in the classical sense. They believe in cradle-to-grave government involvement in people's lives, and I don't believe they believe in the fundamentals. Take a look at Barack Obama's commercial, his famous Julia commercial, where he traces literally a little girl from when she's born to when she's an old lady. You can see this. So that's the polarized nature of the situation today in politics. Now, let's talk about Republicans. Well, one of the reasons Republicans lost is the candidate was not seen very favorably. You can see the numbers right there. Barack Obama last year had a 53% positive favorable rating, 46% unfavorable, compared to Romney, 47% favorable, 50% unfavorable. Sorry, if your candidate has those kind of unfavorables, you're going to have a tough time with it. But the Republican problems go much, much deeper. They really are demographic. Take a look at the Hispanic vote. Romney got 27% of the Hispanic vote compared to 31% for McCain in 2008, compared to 44% for Bush in 2004. Now here's the thing. Hispanics right now make up 17% of the American population. By 2050, they're going to make up 30%. So you can see right now on the demographics, the Republicans are on the losing end. Let's take white non-Hispanics. Again, Republicans do pretty well there. 59% went for Romney, 56% for McCain, 57% for Bush. But of the white non-Hispanic population right now, 62%. In 2050, it's only going to be 47%. The demographics, again, are shifting against the Republicans. Let's take a look at another group that's very strongly Republican, white evangelicals. 78% of individuals calling themselves white evangelicals went for Romney. And by the way, 50% of the voters in Republican primaries called themselves white evangelicals. They'll call themselves evangelicals, have to be white. But again, here is the demographic problem. Take a look at the population of over 65 and then 50 to 65 who consider themselves white evangelicals, 28%, 29%. And take a look at the 18 to 29-year-olds consider themselves evangelicals, only 12%. And interestingly enough, a whopping 35% of those younger people are unaffiliated or list no affiliation for religion. So again, Republicans demographically on the losing side. 18 to 29-year-olds, actually Romney got 37%, a little bit of an improvement over John McCain, but well below George W. Bush. So again, they have a serious problem with the 18 to 29-year-old. One of the big problems there is that early votes tend to determine party identification. For example, we see that people 50 and older tend to be more heavily Republican. Those are the people who started voting in the 1980s. They voted once, twice for Reagan, maybe for George Bush the First, and they tended to remain Republicans, and they're now the older voters. You see voters coming in now, voting for McCain, or voting for Barack Obama one time, maybe two times. They're getting into a pattern of identifying themselves with Democrats. Again, this is a serious problem in the long run for the Republicans. Take a look at another issue concerning young people, by the way. A survey found, in response to the word capitalism, 46% of 18 to 29-year-olds had a positive response, 47% negative, compared to 50% positive and 40% negative of the overall population. Now look at the response of young people to the term socialism. 49% positive, only 43% negative, compared to a 60% positive in the overall population. So it should be 60% negative for the overall population of those figures. So you see that there's some very serious issues with young people and Republicans. This slide, capitalism is the crisis. That's from one of the Occupy demonstrations in Washington, D.C. Okay, let's do a very quick survey here of the Republican Party and how it went from freedom to non-freedom. Goldwater, of course, was a very strong individualist, in a sense an anti-establishment Republican back in 1960. Ronald Reagan very much reflected that Goldwater notion of individualism. This is a quote right here from the Republican Party platform of 1980. Now, free individuals in a free society has long been the fundamental conviction of the Republican Party that government should foster in our society a climate of maximum individual liberty and freedom of choice. And I could go over lots of other quotes, but it was very strongly a freedom party back in 1980. Slide thing working here. There we go. The Reagan coalition was made up of three parts. First, what I call the libertarianish part, people who are influenced by Mises, Hayek, Ayn Rand, for example. Very optimistic type people, very much favor enlightenment values, very much believing that individual freedom is a good thing, that freedom unleashes the potential of the individual. Therefore, these folks tended to believe in limited government, rule of law, constitutional checks and balances. The second element of the Reagan coalition were traditional conservatives, influenced by Edmund Burke, Russell Kirk, Bill Buckley. They were rather pessimistic about human nature. They believed that the human ego, when unleashed, could do very terrible things. The French Revolution was kind of their ultimate nightmare, the mob rule. But to keep people in line, they believed that we should have limited government, rule of law, and constitutional checks and balances, because if government had too much power, those terrible egos, so to speak, that created things like the French Revolution would come to politics, and it would be a very bad situation indeed. So there was agreement on the policies, though not where they come from. Then there were social conservatives. Now, social conservatives usually overlapped with the traditional conservatives. They believed in censorship in a lot of areas concerning, for example, printed material and the like, state restrictions on morality. But generally, it wasn't their most important thing, and this part of the party was fairly weak. Now, what happened after Ronald Reagan is you see a takeover, or a growth, I should say, in the Republican Party of several factions. First, the so-called neoconservatives. And I have a little quote here from Irving Kristol, considered kind of the godfather of the neoconservatives, who said that neocons are impatient with F.A. Hayek's notion that we're on the road to serfdom. Neocons do not feel that kind of alarm or anxiety about the growth of the state in the past century, seeing it as natural, indeed inevitable. People have always preferred strong government to weak. Neocons feel at home in today's America to a degree that more traditional conservatives do not. And they have really no need for people like Barry Goldwater and frankly Ronald Reagan, if they were honest about it. Very different premises from the libertarians or even the traditional conservatives. That's where the neocons are coming from. Many of these neocons, let me get my next slide here, were former communists and leftists who saw the failures of the welfare state. Sorry about that. The failures of the welfare state. But their goal was a better society. It wasn't to maximize individual liberty. They rejected the egalitarianism of the left. They saw the importance of institutions and hierarchy. Sometimes their policies overlap those of conservatives or libertarians. Basically, think of neocons as social engineers from the right. And the Bush White Houses, Bush 1 and 2, really were dominated by neoconservatives. Just wanted to save the system and make it work better, pass new environmental laws, new entitlements, and the like. That's the neocons. Okay, social conservatives. Again, these were, this is a group that had been in the party for quite a while, but the difference between the social conservative and a lot of traditional conservatives are that the social conservatives kind of gave top priority and give top priority to the social issues. Usually they're religiously motivated. They want the state to actually go in and regulate morality. Things like gay marriage are important to them, banning abortion, maybe having God in the pledge, things of that nature. Again, there are a lot of traditional conservatives who probably would agree with that, but it's just not their top issue, whereas for social conservatives it is. And I always like to quote Rick Santorum here, who said this whole idea of personal autonomy, I don't think that most conservatives hold to that point of view, this personal autonomy thing. One of the criticisms he makes of this is the so-called libertarianist right, is like this idea of liberty. And he criticizes the liberals, incidentally, for saying it takes a village. And he says that this ideology is based on individualism. I don't know where that gets that. It's based on collectivism, the notion of the builders. Come on. But anyway, he believes that our ideology and politics should be based on the family, not the individual. So they have a very different ideological perspective than the old-fashioned Reaganites will view with the Goldwater lights. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. There we go. Okay, now what we've seen in the last 4 years is a reaction both to Obama and to these factions of the Republican Party. We've seen this in the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement focused, of course, mainly on economic issues, the power of government, the increased power of government, things like Obamacare. These are their top priorities. They're against government, the big government spending, the environmental extremism, and the like. Now, several surveys have shown that the people who identify as Tea Party movement members are about half libertarianish and about half more traditional conservatives. But again, they're conservatives who give priority to the problems of the size of government and the government spending and so forth, not to the social issues. The results of the Tea Party movement have been mixed at the polls. Some candidates they've strongly supported have won and done very well. Ron Johnson, Wisconsin, Marco Rubio, Florida, Ted Cruz of Texas, and of course Rand Paul of Kentucky. Some of them have not done so good. O'Donnell in Delaware, Engel in Nevada should have knocked off Harry Reid a couple of elections ago. Murdoch in Indiana should have won that seat. Aiken, the Tea Party folks didn't support him in the primary, so they did support him in the general election. But interestingly enough, the candidates who have been backed by the Tea Party who have lost have tended to lose not on the economic issues, but on the social issues. So again, they have a very different perspective than the Goldwater, Reagan conservatives or Republicans. Now, what's happening today is there is a civil war going on within the Republican Party, as I mentioned, between these various factions. And I'll give you a couple of reports from the battlefield, so to speak. We see at CPAC, the CPAC, for those of you who don't know, is a conservative political action conference held every year. it's up to about 10,000 attendees. It has tended to be a very open, big tent event with all the factions coming together, speakers from all perspectives putting forward their message, display tables from every organization you can imagine that chooses to sponsor the event. And what happened in the last year or two is that Go Proud, which was a gay Republican group, had been excluded from CPAC. And this happened when the CPAC had a change of management, and David Keene, who used to organize it, left, and the new management decided to push the gay group out. And beforehand, by the way, Heritage, the Heritage Foundation, and several of the major family groups boycotted CPAC because there was a gay group in attendance. And so you see what's going on in CPAC, this kind of obsession of social conservatives with gays, and even though Go Proud wasn't officially for gay marriage, still you see that that was their priority. Now, interestingly enough, CPAC has still tended to be very libertarianish oriented. In 2009, for example, the survey was done, they always do these, to say, what are your priorities? And in 2009, 74% of the attendees who responded said freedom, more freedom is our most important issue. Only 15% said promoting traditional values is most important, 10% national security. In 2010, the straw poll for who should be president was won by Ron Paul. And even though gays were excluded, and they had this big controversy, Rand Paul, the son of Ron and the up-and-coming star of the party, won the 2013 straw poll with 25%. And by the way, Rubio came in, that should be 23%, not 13%. Rubio came in at 13%, or 23%, and Santorum only came in at 8%. You've also seen some pushback on this gay marriage issue, by the way, with Republicans. There's a Supreme Court case right now that a number of Republicans have signed a brief in support of gay marriage. Rob Portman, who's the senator from Ohio, has supported it. He's got a case on. And interesting enough, Charles Murray, one of those respected theorists of the conservative movement, came out at CPAC and said, guys, you're going to be on the losing side of history on this gay marriage issue. And by the way, I think that's correct, because again, if you look at young voters, you find that on issues like gays, it's just not a big issue for them. But you've also seen within the Republican Party's pushback from those neocons, the establishment types. Karl Rove, for example, who controls a lot of the money to be given out in primaries in the general election, has said that his group is going to be much more careful about who they give money out to. Now, you might say that sounds reasonable. They don't want to give money out to a candidate, like, say, an Aiken or an O'Donnell in Delaware, who sort of sounds like a nut. But the belief is, and I think this is true, that Rove and people like that really want to support more of the establishment candidates, as opposed to not just social conservatives, but the Tea Party ones, the ones who really want to roll back the government. That's what's going on right now in the Republican Party. Is there a libertarian alternative? Well, Libertarian Party has been around since 1972. Now, last year, Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, got 1% of the national vote, 1.27 million. This was the highest number of votes that Libertarians have gotten. It almost doubled, or more than doubled, I should say, the vote that Libertarian Party got in 2008. So that's very good. But I'm afraid the Libertarian Party is simply going to remain a minority, and a very small minority party, for a number of reasons. First of all, they have few local office holders who have worked their way up, or will work their way up into higher office. Most people who become congressmen, senators, and so forth don't start simply by coming out of nowhere. Some do, by the way. Ron Johnson was a business person. You do have people like that. But in many cases, they start on their county commission or town council, and they work their way up to the state house and so forth, and that's how they do it. Few Libertarians have taken that path. So you don't have a stable, so to speak, of proven policy people. Too much of the Libertarian Party has been like a debating society rather than a political party. They haven't done their groundwork, so to speak, or recruiting party members. candidates like Johnson can raise important issues, but I'm afraid that right now the Libertarians don't really look like they're going to do anything different than they have done since 1972. Therefore, they're going to remain a very small party. So now you're probably depressed because you've seen how bad the Republicans are. You've seen that the Libertarian Party right now does not seem to offer a good alternative, so what to do? Well, okay. First thing is that the factions of the GOP have to look back to the Reagan Goldwater model. And I would say to each of the factions the following. The social conservatives, you're not going to win on most of these social issues. You're not going to win on gay marriage. And gay marriage, by the way, does not in any way limit your liberty. Now, there are certain things that I disagree with. For example, if the government forces somebody, a business, for example, to provide benefits for contraceptives or benefits for gay partners, you might say that's none of the government business. I would absolutely agree with that. But the point is, on a lot of these social issues, the social conservatives simply aren't going to win. They've been fighting these issues for years, and it hasn't worked. And so what they're doing by focusing on these issues as priorities is they're taking a lot of energy, a lot of money, and so forth away from the bigger issues. The liberals and the leftists, in a sense, love social conservatives because they alienate so many independent voters and other voters who might otherwise be looking to the Republican parties for their free market, limited government policies. And so I think social conservatives have to recognize that if they keep fighting these losing battles, what's going to happen, for example, when the liberals and the leftists and the government start coming after things like homeschooling, which they are, by the way, there's a battle they should be focusing on rather than the battles they're focusing on now. The establishment neocons, they're the ones who want to make Medicare work. They're the ones who want to make Social Security work. They want to make the welfare state work. It can't work. All they can do is slow down the decline and the collapse. And I think they have to step back and recognize that. I know that they have to be careful about the rhetoric sometime. They can't just say, I'm going to abolish Social Security tomorrow, because it's not going to happen. You have to win over the hearts and minds. Remember the first thing I set up at the beginning of this talk. But establishment conservatives have to recognize that the path they're following will simply slow the collapse, but it will not stop the collapse. It might not go as fast as Western Europe, but we're going to go. They have to realize that, and that they have to look towards the policies at work, the free market policies. Tea Party folks, they're doing a better job. They have to stick to the economic issues, to the government issues, stay away from the social issues, and be careful about who they pick and support. You can't have kooks running, okay? You're going to get in trouble when you do that. That's what I'd say to the three factions within the party if they really want to avoid being in the dustbin of history. I'd say a few other important things. First, work locally. A lot of this discussion has been about the national level, but a lot of work goes on at the local level. This is where state legislatures, for example, can do good things or bad things. Governors can do good things or bad things. There are a lot of local groups outside of the Republican Party, but maybe in sympathy with them. The Maryland Taxpayers Association, I'm in the state of Maryland, the Socialist Republic of Maryland, that's what they call it. So a lot of work can be done at the local level that eventually, hopefully, will translate into the national level. There needs to be outreach to immigrants. I've mentioned the problem Republicans have with Hispanics. Now, granted, Hispanics are not a unified bloc, and they have differences on what to do with illegal immigrants. But here is the point. Let's talk about fundamentals. Let's talk about philosophy. Republicans, conservatives, people who believe in the importance of taking responsibility, improving your own lot and all, they should be celebrating immigrants, even the illegal ones. Because what have the illegal ones done for the most part? They said, should I wait for a bunch of paper-shuffling government bureaucrats to give me permission to come to the United States so I can stand in front of a Home Depot and work my butt off for a better life? Or should I basically sit here in Mexico for who knows how many years and suffer and watch my family suffer? The only moral thing to do in a situation like that would be to come here illegally. Republicans, conservatives, shouldn't get irritated at the illegal immigrants for the most part. They should get irritated at the U.S. government for not having a good way to get them in. Here's an outreach where our values, Republican or let's say freedom values, work in our favor. That is, reach out to these folks, and yes, there has to be something done with what we do with illegals right now, but these are the people who come here to work their butts off for a better life. Isn't this exactly the spirit and the morality we want in America? By the way, I would say that the deal should be if you're an illegal immigrant, you can stay here if you give up all future claims on Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance, no government benefits in the future. On the other hand, you're not going to have to pay into Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment, and so forth. So how's that for a deal? Next, reach out to the wealth creators. There's a whole new class of entrepreneurs coming out of the information communications revolution who are wealth creators. They're kind of like what I call the Steve Jobs types, who are squishy liberals, but they're individualists. They love what they do. They're making money through their own efforts, and they would probably find an appeal to the Republican Party or freedom movement if the Republicans weren't pushing the social agenda. Obviously, the Republicans have to reach out to the Ron Paul and Rand Paul voters. They pushed the Ron Paul voters out of the convention in Florida. They dissed them. What I would say to young libertarians is you guys have to invade the Republican Party so that proportionally the neocon and the social conservatives proportion goes down. And then I'll just move very quickly. I mean, educating ourselves and obviously educating the public, making a positive appeal to the hearts and minds and moral sense of people for liberty, appealing to self-interest, that people actualize their own dreams. Aren't those the values that are supported by the freedom lovers as opposed to the welfare state types? Appeal to the creator in us all. In other words, this is the morality we should go forward with. The notion that we're all creators, whether we're nurturing a child to maturity or a business to profitability, whether we're writing a song or a poem or a business plan, whether we're laying the bricks to the building or financing that building. We are all creators. We should be proud of our creations. In a benevolent society, when people deal with one another, based on mutual consent, we all flourish. We all are educated and entertained and enriched and enlightened and inspired by our fellows. That's the positive vision that any freedom movement has to put forward. And if the Republicans want to be that freedom movement and not relegated to the dustbin of history as the statists and socialists continue to gain power, that's the kind of vision they have to put forward so that we have a better, happy America. There's my gratuitous photo of a better, happy America. Anyway, I thank you all for your attention, and it's time for questions. And as I say, there's a little box down there where you can, first of all, you can raise your hand if you want to. If you see your name on there, you push the little raise hand button, and I will be able to see your hand, and I can take your questions. Or you can go to the little question box, and so whichever you wish. Let me see. I'm looking to see if there are questions right now. Here we go. Okay. I'm scrolling to see who we have asking any questions. Okay, you all see the little box under chat? That is where you type your questions in. Okay.
Please, folks. Use this. Folks, this is William Thomas. Please put your questions in the questions box. You can type them in the questions box. And Bob Champion has his hand raised. If you'd like, I can unmute him for you.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see that, but go ahead and unmute him. I will go get the attendees list so I can. Sorry, I didn't see him there. Okay, Bob. Okay? Yep, I see Bob. Okay, Bob, go ahead.
You can hear me. Good.
Yep.
Here's my issue, and I've actually I'm a Reagan Republican, conservative, constitutional conservative,
Good.
And as I look at things, I'm 78 years old. I think the Democrats have become essentially the Socialist Party in the United States, and now we've got this pea soup of neocons, the Republican establishment, and the conservatives. I don't see that ever resolving itself, at least before the country's gone to hell, to be honest with you. The last polls that were done, conservatives, people who call themselves conservatives, are 40% of the population, and of those that are moderate, that call themselves moderate, which I think is something like 39%, they're increasingly becoming conservative. And it seems to me that the Tea Party, the Libertarian Party, the Constitutional Party need to get together and form a Freedom Party, and the candidates need to decide if they want to be with the moderate Republicans or with the new conservatives. I don't want to see in the next primary the Republican conservatives splitting up the vote and Jeb Bush, for example, winning by default, which is what happened in the last election.
Yeah. Bob, first of all, I think your points are well taken. There's a lot of frustration in the country, and as you say, if you can see the Tea Party folks, you can see people who call themselves conservatives, and I like by the way, constitutionalists is a very good thing. I like to say that I think the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution is such a great document. I think it should be the law of the land of the United States. So, I mean, I think we should return to the Constitution, which we haven't been, governed by, at least in many ways, for some time. But I'll tell you, here's the you might say the organizational strategic problem. I've mentioned the numbers on the Libertarian Party. Let's go back to a couple of slides back. There we go. Again, the Libertarian Party has tended to focus more on like a great debating society. And since their foundation, 40 years ago, 72, 89, yeah. What have they done in terms of building up a national organization? Nothing really. They have some very good candidates occasionally. Gary Johnson obviously did a very good job, but a very good job of getting 1% of the national vote. So the problem is, I'd love to see sort of libertarians, people who are the libertarianish Reagan, Goldwater wing of the Republican Party, people who call themselves constitutionalists and so forth, to come together. But I don't know how that you can do that in an organized party way, because one of the reasons why the Republicans got beat last time, Mitt Romney especially, was not only the fact that he was wishy-washy, he couldn't figure out which side of the argument he was on and so forth over a period of time, but the Republicans had a terrible ground game. And the Republicans were basically out-organized by Barack Obama. Barack Obama and his people knew how to use the internet. They knew how to use tweets. They knew how to use all these things. A lot of Republicans were still trying to figure out, how the heck to use the smartphone. So a lot of it is not just the message, which is absolutely crucial, as I've indicated, but how do you organize, those ideas into a winning coalition that can get people on the ground, get voters out to the polls, and so forth. Republicans couldn't do that, and again, even in a situation where the economy was next to the Depression, it was the worst economy it was in, and yet Barack Obama won, and in part because Republicans didn't expect that they would get the kind of turnout that they did, but they out-organized the Republican Party. So,
let me add just one quick point that
sure.
To have a ground game, you need enthusiasm. You need people excited about it. And in the last election, people weren't that excited about Romney. They weren't excited about the mushy positions. The Tea Party has no problem getting people out. I went to my first political rally, which was in Monterey, California, which was a Tea Party rally at the time. And there's a lot of enthusiasm. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm on the right. Look at the enthusiasm Rand Paul engendered when he did his filibuster. And there's no way, there's no way the Republican Party, as it is now, it's declining. I just read here that they've declined in 21 of 28 states, the voter rolls of registered Republicans. It's just, I think it's a dying party, and it's got its name association is terrible. You saw that survey where people agreed with all these different statements of policy, and then as soon as someone said, well, these are actually Republican policies, they changed their mind, and then they were against them.
Okay. By the way, good points. I'm going to take a few more questions. And by the way, I would add the enthusiasm thing is very important. And I might add that Rand Paul, with that filibuster, he embarrassed a lot of Democrats who supposedly stand for civil liberties and found themselves defending things that Barack Obama was doing that, well, my gosh, I thought you guys at least, believed in certain things. So Rand Paul is certainly one of the up-and-coming ones. He's very smart, too. On gay marriage, for example, he's personally a traditionalist, a traditional individual. That's fine. But what he says is maybe we should have separation between marriage and state. Maybe we should keep the government out of it. Let people make their own contracts. They can sanctify them in churches or however it is that they want to do it. But also not have the government mandate that, for example, if you're a business owner, you're forced to give people certain advantages if they're gay and so forth. So I think that might be a good approach.
Well, by the way, John, as you saw, John McCain jumped up and got all over Rand Paul for doing that. And that's
well, I know. And then they went to
right there is the issue in the party.
Right. Okay. Let me go ahead and take a few more questions. We've got a number of them coming in now. Let's see. What are the prospects for gaining influence in the Democratic Party since we have common interests with at least some of them on personal liberty and civil liberties? It's interesting. I have a longer paper coming out, probably to be in a collection probably by June, I hope. And I had a longer section on that. I kind of cut it down, and the reason is, as I said early on in my presentation, the Democratic Party is changing. It's literally not my father's Democratic Party. My father is 80 years old. He's a kind of traditional Democrat. Personally, he's got traditional values, but he thinks that, we have to have a safety net, and he thinks the economy sometimes needs to be tweaked. But the Democrats today, and especially the leadership, are, as Bob said, socialists. They're corporatists rather than socialists who believe the government should officially take over everything. So instead of the government literally, giving the checks to the doctors directly and the doctors basically being government employees, they want to do it sort of secondhand. It used to be called fascism, by the way, when Benito Mussolini came up with this notion. So unfortunately, what I see in the Democratic Party is an incredible shift in terms of the views on the role of government and even on civil liberties now. The statism of the Democratic Party is coming out. They're for special privileges for certain groups, but they're the ones, and the people who are moving into the party are the ones, for example, who believe in speech codes on university campuses. They're the ones who want to control our diets. Okay, Bloomberg, I think, is nominally Republican, but it's not. But they're the ones who want the government to micromanage our lives in a lot of other ways. So I wish that there were some light on the Democratic Party side. I just don't, I'm afraid, see much there. Let me see. Next, how do you view Rand Paul's chances of being effective through the Republican Party? I've kind of already addressed that. I'm very positive right now on Rand Paul. He's tried to navigate this gay issue, so he doesn't want to offend social conservatives, but he wants to say, guys, this isn't a priority. Maybe we should just get the government out of this whole thing. How's that for a compromise? By the way, I want to mention Marco Rubio, who's, of course, another one of the up-and-comers. He had an interesting situation in December, I believe it was, a reporter asked him, trying to do a gotcha thing, and asked him, how old is the Earth? He was kind of asking Rubio, are you a creationist? You know, and trying to embarrass him and make him sound like some kind of a rube. And you could tell that Rubio was squirming and trying not to offend social conservatives to whom he wants to appeal, but not to sound like he's some kind of a flat earther. And what he basically tried to do is say, look, I know what the theories are and so forth, but what does that have to do with cutting taxes? What does that have to do with the size of government? What does it have to do with any of the important issues? So you could see Marco Rubio trying to put some distance between, you know, himself and some of these issues that frankly have nothing to do with public policy, unless you're trying to push creationism in schools or something. But yeah, Rand Paul, I think, is very attractive, and we'll just have to see how he does in the next couple of years. Let's see, how do you get our appeals through the fog of statist lies which appeal to an innumerate electorate that has no skin in the game and is supported by most of the media? Well, that is a problem, isn't it? I would say that you do a number of things. First of all, this is where the Tea Party has really been good and can be even better, is you work at the local level. You can't assume that the networks are going to you know, put in anything vaguely resembling balanced coverage. And we've known that for years, for decades. That's why using other media to get through to people is important. Also, it's very important, I think, to try to come up with ways of showing the electorate that they do have skin in the game, that look at what they're accepting. And one of the examples I think that we really could gain is education. Everybody, or I should say, you know, virtually everybody wants their children to have, you know, a good education. Any of you who haven't seen the movie Waiting for Superman, there we go, children. Any of you who haven't seen the movie Waiting for Superman really have to do yourselves a favor and see it. And it focused a lot on the schools, private schools, charter schools, and especially the attempts of governments, the liberals, to keep people from you know, having vouchers to take their kids to school, these kind of schools. But what you saw is the poorest of the poor in the inner city in Washington, D.C., or you can have the same thing out in Prince George's County, Maryland, where I used to live up until a few years ago. They want their kids to get out of the horrible, wretched, crime-ridden situation that they're in. And they cannot do it through the current education system because it is indeed so wretched. And there's an area, and there is a group where they have skin in the game, but no one has figured out how to make the right appeal. And to say, for example, you know, I go before an audience of, you know, the poorest of the poor, so to speak, but people who really love their children and want to do best. Do something like this. Say, okay, how many of you folks think that you're smart enough to go out and figure out what kind of a phone to buy? You know, you ever want to raise their hands. How many of you think you're smart enough to figure out what kind of a TV or personal computer to buy? You get everyone's going to raise their hands. You know, you go to, assuming it can go to Consumer Reports, it can go to cnet.com, et cetera. How many of you think you can figure out which car to buy without the government, you know, telling you, you know, giving you the information? Everyone's going to raise their hand. Okay, how many of you think you're so stupid that you can't figure out what kind of school to send your children to? Again, given that you have the information and all. How many of you would like to, when you go into a store and they don't have the stuff you like, you basically take your money and you go elsewhere? Wouldn't it be great if, when the schools who are jerking you around and screwing your children and basically look more like prison camps? Some of the schools where I used to go to in Maryland, they literally look like prisons. They have barbed wire. They have metal detectors. They have security guards. They look like prisons. How many people want to put up with that kind of stuff? Imagine a good appeal like this. That's the kind of thing, by the way, that Jack Kemp used to do. He was very effective at this. So there's something where you can make an appeal to people who do have skin in the game and say you don't have to put up with this kind of stuff. So there's an example. Okay, a couple more here. Move down real quickly. Is there truly a difference between leftist Democrats, neocons, statists, social conservatives? They all seem focus on the government enforcing their set of rules. The answer is fundamentally no. They all believe the government should enforce their rules, but in practice there are some differences. The neocons, for example, do reject some of the stupider of the social engineering programs, the ones that manifestly don't work. That's why I say that sometimes neocon policy and conservative policies overlap. For example, things like school vouchers. They would overlap because, again, the neoconservatives used to be, many of them used to be leftists, and they saw that the leftist policies simply weren't working. They still want to use the state, they just want to use it more effectively. Social conservatives, again, tend on a lot of things to share values with sort of traditional free market conservatives. It's just that they put the social issues first. But even there, Reince Priebus, the head of the Republican Party, just said something, I don't have the quote right in front of me, about Mike Huckabee being sort of a model Republican. Mike Huckabee is not only a social conservative, but look at him on economics. He's terrible. Look at him on wanting to, he looks like Michelle Obama on, well, we should really control people's diets because obviously most of you are too stupid to know how to buy a soft drink. So a lot of the social conservatives aren't even good on the economic stuff. So yes, fundamentally they all want to use the state, but there are some differences that you have to realize. And sometimes you can actually wake up a social conservative and say, guys, look, you know, you may have these values, that's fine, but you know, you're going to lose everything if you don't focus on the essentials. Okay, going down here real quickly. As one of the 54 that walked out of the Young Americans for Freedom National Conference back in the 60s, that's 68, I think, in which 12 went on to form the Libertarian Party. The solution, if it works, is to change from within. The other approach has failed year after year in many states. Even non-Republican Democrats can't run in the primary. So you're basically, I think what you're basically saying is that you agree with me that, you know, the Libertarian Party was a great idea, but it just has not worked. Again, that's my sympathies are with them. But you know, I'm sorry, it's been 40 years, and we're sort of waiting for, we just cracked the 1% barrier, even though Gary Johnson is an excellent candidate. Shouldn't we be working to reform the two-party system itself? Political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution. A political party, large or small, should have no rights, no more rights than any other voluntary private organization. I think that's a tall order, and the reason is because you're not going to find any one of the two political parties, which is the vast majority of politicos, who are willing to do that. It would mean you'd have to start a strong, you know, sort of counter movement. And again, if the Libertarian Party can't do it in politics, I'm not sure exactly how you can do that in, you know, in trying to reform the whole system. But again, as I think, as Bob pointed out a little bit earlier, you know, in one sense, the Democratic Party is on the losing side of history. It's just that a lot of the people don't quite know it yet. We're such a complicated and immensely invasive federal government, with state government close behind and with county government striving to imitate both the latter and the former. What hope is there without some electoral structural change, such as, for example, term limits, changing elections with lottery to service similar to jury system? Bottom line, don't we need some structural reform? I tend to be in favor of term limits, by the way. But again, part of the problem is that if we can't change even the most malicious and stupid and failed public policies, how are you going to change the whole system? That's why I'm saying sort of reluctantly that I think you have to work within the current system. I'd like to, because remember, I gave this history of the Republican Party as being a very freedom-oriented party, and I kind of traced its, you know, its decline. And what I'm saying is that with the Rand Paul people, with the incredible enthusiasm of young people, with a lot of these new wealth creators who probably would be more with the Republicans if the Republicans we're basically more freedom-oriented on the social issues. I think this can be done in the long term. And by the way, the Students for Liberty is a group of young libertarians, campus-oriented group that started, 6 years ago with like a handful of people, a couple of dozen. We at the Atlas Society had, I think, 7 speakers at their international conference in February, and I forget whether there were 1,200 or 1,400, maybe closer to 1,400 people there. The young people really, this is let me give you another bit of interesting polling data real quickly here. In the spring of last year, March or April, I think it was, it was either Rasmussen or one of the other polling companies looked at who had a positive response to Ron Paul. And something very interesting, there's 2 groups. One, young libertarians, you would expect, had a very positive response to Ron Paul. The other group were disillusioned young Democrats who had voted for Barack Obama but just didn't find him very satisfying. And they saw Ron Paul as kind of an honest, genuine person. Maybe they disagreed with him on some of the issues. But again, I'm basically saying those young people really are the key to the future of not only the Republican Party but the freedom movement. So there's a place to focus. Let's see, in Southwest, another question here. Southwest Pennsylvania, many of the Tea Party people seem to be moving to libertarian policies. Freedom is the issue. The Republican Party does have a problem, and that gives the libertarian constitutionalists an opportunity. Again, I completely agree with you, is that they do have a problem, and that's why a coalition of libertarians, the Tea Party people, conservatives who might have conservative values, similar to social conservatives, but who say, look, we'll work that stuff out later. We're not going to have a country if we don't focus on these big-ticket issues. So I agree with you there. I would like to get marriage out of government, but the scores of issues that are legal related to marriage are fundamental obstacles to removing marriage from government. Yeah, there are issues there. As I say, I believe that a person should be able to make whatever kind of contract they want with another. There's one contract that we call marriage, okay, and it's recognized as, under common law as including certain obligations and so forth, and I don't want to restrict anybody's freedom to make that kind of contract. What I do want to do is restrict the power of government to tell a private party, you have to do the following. For example, to take a different issue than the gay issue. I personally have no problem with contraception, okay? I'm not a Catholic, even though I got a PhD from Catholic University. No problem with it. But I don't believe that I should be forced to pay for my neighbor's birth control. And I certainly don't believe that some Catholic who finds birth control morally offensive should be forced to do that either. So there are these issues, but I think we should fight them on those grounds. And unfortunately, a lot of the rhetoric I've seen about gays has been, frankly, hateful and bigoted, and it makes Republicans look bad. It's not the kind of issues that you raise about, these kind of legal mandates. This starts local precinct project. Also, the most important items to family is the school board, municipal school board. Someone just wrote that as a comment. Absolutely agree. You want to make some waves, do it at that level. Someone said every time advance a slide, it makes a bump. Okay, I should probably be careful about making too much noise here. Let me see. Since the existing government structure is weighed in favor of a two-party system, it becomes fundamental to take over one party or the other. How will we engage those interested in change to push the neocons' negative biased messages out of the equation, like the marriage, gun rights, and move the dialogue back to individual liberty being the cornerstone of the Republican Party? How do we do it? Well, again, I've kind of tried to do that in my talk, and I think one of the things to do is offer the positive alternative. One of the reasons why neocons can, well, there's two kinds of neocon policies. Some are just absolute, they just simply state as policies. I mean, George W. Bush, did more to damage the Republican Party brand than I think any president since Richard Nixon. George W. Bush was the one who pushed for a new prescription drug benefit, new terrible environmental laws, and a lot of these other really bad things came out of George W. Bush because he and his White House were very neocon oriented. So those kind of policies. And then there are sort of neocon policies, well, we want to save Medicare. We want to save Social Security. Paul Ryan, who, I think is otherwise a really good guy, his rhetoric is sort of along those lines. He's scared to say, well, look, these just don't work very well. And I think what we have to do is present the positive alternative. And we do have those, by the way. The Cato Institute, where I used to work, did some incredible number crunching back in the 90s, where they showed, for example, that if you took a 40-year period going back to before the Depression, and if you took the money that's currently invested in Social Security and put it into any kind of a conservative, S&P 500 portfolio, in every single instance, kind of going from whatever 40-year period you pick, including periods that had depressions and world wars, you would still end up with 2 to 3 times more return on your investment than in the current Social Security system. Very powerful argument, and certainly one that we could put forward as, we're tired of people getting gypped with the Social Security system. Let's see. Another question. Who are driving more voters away from the Republican Party, neocons or social conservatives? Oh, boy. That's kind of a toughie. I tend to say right now social conservatives because a lot of their stuff just sounds, without even an excuse. Like, again, the marriage issue. There is an issue about whether the government should force people to, give benefits to gays, but that's usually not the issue that they're debating. It's something else. The social conservatives right now, I think, are a little bit more of the problem. Again, some of the social conservative leaders now are not really for free markets either, but it's kind of close. Here's another quick question. By the way, it's a little after 10, and I'll keep going. And it looks like about 20 people at least are still in the room, so I'll keep going as long as we have questions here. In Pennsylvania, school choice is a major issue for the Tea Party and traditional conservatives. And yes, great. And again, these are battles that we can win, where we are on the side of the angels, so to speak. Allowing for school choice. Again, this is something that middle-class people should agree with, and prosperous people should agree, and I would think that the poorest of the poor, they're the ones who have the most to gain, because they're the ones who are in the worst, terrible school systems. I see the Libertarian guy walked out of the app, just said, yep, it was 1968, absolutely. In Southwest Pennsylvania, I am working with several campus groups to bring together the energetic youth with Tea Party traditionalists. This seems to be taking off. I am very glad to hear that. Feel free to contact me at the Atlas Society if you want any assistance from us. We have lots of materials. We have a whole campus of student outreach programs, so we have possible materials for you. I've spoken at Tea Party events in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and we'd be happy to help you with any intellectual ammunition that we might. Let me see here. Someone else is saying, sorry, they must leave now. Bye. If we were able to create and establish a constitutional conservative party, what would you name it? Freedom Party? Gosh, I don't know. I wish that was the problem that we had, trying to figure out what name to create it. By the way, I like the word liberty a little bit better than freedom, because freedom, the term freedom is often misused. You say freedom from want, freedom from fear, the Roosevelt sort of stuff. Whereas liberty really is liberty to do what I want. And so I tend to think liberty is a little bit better. But I hope someday we're in a situation. By the way, I believe there is a constitutional party that occasionally runs. I forget whether it's Howard Phillips or who the person they usually run for offices. And again, they get a microscopic number of votes. So it's a matter of not just founding a party and putting a name on it like Libertarians. It's a matter of building the movement. So Let me see. Are there any? Let me take a look and see if we have any raised hands over here in the microphone zone. Take this down here real quick.
No, you don't, Ed.
Okay. The answer is I don't see any raised hands. I do see a lot of my friends over there, so I want to say hi to some of my friends over there. Okay, any other questions in the little question box? Seeing none, I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. You can reach me, by the way, at the Atlas Society. My email address is, what is my email address? EHUDGINS@atlassociety.org. You can get us on the telephone. The number is 202 Ayn Rand, easy to remember, 202-296-7263 if you want to remember it that way, and our website, www.atlassociety.org. And again, I thank you all for attending. I hope this was enlightening. I hope that you guys go out and continue to fight for freedom, because as you can see from the slide on the screen, I do have skin in the game. 2 little 2-year and 2-month-old bits of skin, as well as my wife and myself there. And so I'm going to make sure that my daughters go into a world that is free, that is prosperous, and that celebrates human achievement. So it's going to happen, okay? You just have to work out the tactics. So thank you all for coming, and hope you'll tune in next time for some more of our seminars at the Atlas Society webinars.